This is an interview with Joe Jacobs by Cliff Kuhn and Millie Bike, August 16th, 1991. Jacobs in Langford, Georgia Government Documentation Project.
Strikers over there, and they had this fight on a weekend that would have never meant anything, so they charged him with assault with intent to murder. They put him in jail with no bond, claiming the guy is dying and all this other stuff. We had to file 2 habeas corpuses there before we finally got him out on a bond, and I think I may have related in that one that Judge Jim Davis set the bond at $7,500 and under his breath said, now let's see who will put up that kind of bond for these communists.
No, you didn't mention that. Why don't you tell me the whole story?
Oh, you mean that? I didn't tell you that story?
Gotten to that one.
Oh, shoot.
Jim Davis.
You know what I should have done? I should have had my recorder over this past weekend.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason I said that is because I ran into Bob Siegel, who's a long-time labor lawyer in Boston, Massachusetts. Bob was bragging that he was the oldest labor lawyer there, and I put him in his place real quick. And he had come through a man named Rauer, R-O-W-E-R's office. And Rauer was involved way back yonder in the famous Danbury hat case, and also was involved in the what was the IWW strike that they had in New England? He represented them.
Lawrence strike.
Yeah, he represented them in that one. That was 12 or 16, I forget the date of it. And he learned his labor law there and has since practiced and been practicing. And so we were exchanging anecdotes, and we got in, and he was bragging that they'd been in tough situations, never gotten beaten up or hurt or anything. So I had to tell him where I got beat up down in Greenville, and some of the other things, and Demopolis, the crowd and so on that we brought over. I kept saying, I just wished I had this recorder of some kind, because if I had, why, then we could have checked them back.
Well, let's talk about
Which deuce?
she broke them.
Sat on Lithonia was that the granite cutters, and this started under Butch, before Butch Hathaway went to work for him. He went to work after we had that strike. And he was the one who later on, I told you, became the Secretary-Treasurer of the Meat Cutters Union before he died. They tried to organize the quarry workers who were all black. I believe the granite cutters at that time who were in another union had a handful of people who worked in the shed. The quarry workers were in the quarry, granite workers in the shed, and they were the ones that worked with machinery. The quarry workers, what they did by and large was to drill holes with one of these drills that shakes your guts out, and then put sticks of dynamite in, then turn around and blow it. That separated the rock, then cut that rock up on the spot there, doing something very similar to what they did in the shed, except they were doing it by dynamite, which was the much more dangerous way of doing it, and a much more dirty and nasty. There was no such thing as wearing masks or anything of that kind in terms of health things. I remember that a few times that I went out there to see some of the guys and talk with them. When you got to them, they were just literally had a coating of dust on them. And this is the kind of work they did. Anyway, we had the strike. Everybody came out except one black man. All of them are black, everybody but one. Who was the black man? This is an old guy who worked in the office with the Davidson people who would sweep up the place and keep it clean. And when they needed somebody to go on an errand down the road to pick up something, why, he'd go on the errand and come back. Drove an old, dilapidated truck for the company, but that made him a wheel because he had a much easier job, and when he wasn't doing anything, he probably would sit over in a corner somewhere and hide where they couldn't see him and not have any work to do and snooze or whatever. Anyway, comes, I think it was either the second or third weekend, and he is in a little grocery store in Lithonia, and here's some of these guys who are on strike, younger men, come in and they got a Coca-Cola, whatever it was, and the next thing you know, why, they got into an argument about the strike, and they called him an Uncle Tom, and he told them how good the boss was, and the more he told them how good he was, the more mad they got. And so I'm not sure at this moment whether he started then to walk away. They all started to walk away at the same time, but in any event, they walked out of the store, walked down the road, and they kept arguing about it. Next thing you know, why, he walked away from them, and they arguing at him, and somebody threw a brick. When they threw a brick at him, he caught him in the forehead, and it broke the skin, and it started bleeding a little. Now, if it were a serious thing, I would have known it because of the developments that happened later on. When they did that, they didn't run, but he kept on going. And when he kept on going, he called up his boss, Mr. Davison. When he called Davison up, Davison said,
Davis or Davison?
Davidson, Davidson. They're a big family out there.
Yeah.
They're the ones who own a big a couple of mountains over there, like Stone Mountain, like the old Venable family owned Stone Mountain with their Ku Klux Klan. Well, Davidson is one of the old families, but a Kluxer in his own right too. Anyway, when they call him up, he rolls out to this playerless place. He picks him up. He goes over here to the only black hospital in Atlanta, not the one with Steiner Clinic where they do, where it is a publicly operated one, but this is a private one over there near the Morehouse colleges and all that on Fair Street. It's in that area. It was, as I remember, a 3-story building, private hospital, where blacks who could pay went.
Harris's, was that what it was called?
I don't remember the name, but in any event, that's where he takes them, and he goes and swears out a warrant against these 5 guys of attempted murder, assault with intent to murder. The police roll out, pick them up, and of course the police at that time were under, I would say, under the jurisdiction of Davidson, because Jim Davis, who was the judge, had been his lawyer. The prosecutor was in his church, and the whole caboodle, you know, just tied in like that with a one-man operation. Yeah, the McCurdy family, the Davidson family, and the Candlers, they ran the county. If you were on the wrong side of them, you could expect trouble. Anyway, they put him in the jail, no bond, at the point of death. So what do? So we wait a few days. In the meantime, I go down there to see him. I'm the only one that can go see him, and I bring him something to eat. And they say to me, don't worry about us. Just see that our family is taken care of. If they're taken care of, that's all we want. We'll stop in a few minutes, but it's all right. So I see the sheriff. He says it's up to the judge. I see the judge, tells me it's up to the sheriff. So we wait, we figure, well, I talked to these men, they said, Mr. Jacobs, it wasn't that much blood. He didn't get hurt that bad. They claimed that the rock, when they threw it, it didn't hit him, but it bounced and then hit him. Won't do a thing, won't set the bond. I file a habeas corpus. When I file a habeas corpus, we go down to the hearing. The company doctor is there. The company doctor, and I remember him so well. He's what I call one of these little plump, short people, you know, and just one of the respectable citizens of the community, you know, that the goodness just melted out of his mouth, except when you talk about a black who belongs to a union. That's a different thing. And he had just been there that morning and had examined him at the hospital. He had seen him the night that it happened, and he had given him medication, gave him a shot so he shouldn't get poisoned, and on and on and on and on. And he could not tell whether or not he had progressed sufficiently so that we could say whether he would catch pneumonia or some heart disease that would kill the poor devil. And he goes through this long song and dance, and I put who I got our own people there. I put them up. They say that Browns, they didn't bleed much. You know who the judge believed.
This is Judge Davis.
This is Judge Davis, who, along with the Candlers, used to represent the Davidsons. Refuses to set a bond until they can determine the medical condition. So, in those days, you could not file a motion to have a county doctor or your own doctor take a look at them. You had to go through the sheriff's office. And I figure if you go through the sheriff's office and I get the county doctor, he's going to give me the same baloney that this man's giving me, which I know is going to keep him in jail. We start looking. We find a black nurse. She did not work at this hospital. She worked at Grady. We get a hold of her. We ask her to put on her uniform and to go over to that hospital. We asked her if she knew any people who worked there. She had remembered some people, but she didn't know, you know. Go up there. So she does, and she makes us promise that if anything happens to us, that we'll defend her and all this other, you know. She was real reluctant about going anyway. Up she goes. She goes in there to see him, finds him in his room, walks in to see him. They didn't pay too much attention to her there. She's in a uniform. They may have thought, well, she's working on one of the floors or whatever. She goes in there. He's sitting there with a radio. And the thing that got me was, and she said with a box, I believe she said it was Whitman's candy. And he's sitting there eating it, and he's got what looks like a big Band-Aid across his forehead. And he's sitting in a chair. He's not in bed. And he's listening to the radio. And she stays there and talks to him. And he tells her how good his boss man is to him. How when he got in this fight with these other people and they threw this brick at him and hit him, and he called up his boss man came right quick and picked him up, and he didn't take him to Grady, but he took him to this good hospital where these good doctors would take care of white doctors. We're going to take care. And she talks to him. He's lucid. She asks him, when are you going to go home? Oh, he says something to the effect, they don't want me to worry about going home. Just take it easy and make sure I get well and nothing happens to me. And then he tells about how many times the boss had been there, to visit him since he'd been there. He probably never had so much attention paid to him in his whole life. Make a long story short, I call up the lawyer on the other side. They call up the prosecution was the lawyer on the other side, the DA. Call up the sheriff. I tell him I understand he's getting better. I don't tell him, what the story is. Anyway, they won't do a damn thing. I file a second habeas corpus, and that's what led us into this with this quail business. And I finally get the judge to set it down. He never is in any big rush to set it down. We set it down. He's going to handle us in between his trial of other cases. He was the only judge, so he's trying cases, but he's going to set this down. We go into the grand jury room, and that's where he holds his hearing. And sure enough, they put this doctor back up again, and this time he's not as long-winded about him. He hasn't been to see him in many days, and so I then turn around and put this lady on the stand. She goes through her routine, and then it's up for the judge to make a decision. Before I went, though, on the second occasion, I had a good friend, a lawyer by the name of Arnold Schulman, who later on became a judge of the Court of Appeals here. And when I used to talk to him about handling labor matters, I used to tell him that we always had the odds against us and prejudiced against us because people were not union-minded. People thought that unions were the work of the devil or the communists or whatever it was, and that if he had time, come on out there with me and see what happens. So he rolls out there with me. I drive him out. Judge finally says, well, I've listened to it. He says it may be that he's getting better, but it also could be that if something happened to him and he got a cold and he goes through all this rigmarole.
This is still Jim Davis.
Jim Davis, and infection and everything else. But he says, in view of the fact that he is better, we're going to set this bond at $7,500 apiece. And under his breath, but where I can hear it, he says, and I'd like to see who the hell would put that kind of bond up for these nigger communists.
This is the same Judge Davis who later became congressman.
That's right, who we later on called minimum wage Jim Davis, and we picketed him around the Ansley Hotel, the AFL-CIO people in the City Federation and State Federation. And we leave, and I tell the men, I said, as we leave, I said, don't worry, I said, the union will put the bonds up, we'll get you out. They kept telling me, Mr. Jacobs, don't worry. Make sure that our family's got something to eat. We've been in jail before. It was hot. It was summertime. They said it's a hot place, but he said it's all right. They're not making us work because we're being held subject to whatever happens. Make a long story short, as I walk out of the courthouse, I turn to Arnold and I say, what do you think of it? He pauses for a couple of seconds. He says, if I hadn't have been there, I wouldn't have believed it. Afterwards, when I used to see him talk with me, he's still alive, good friend of mine, and we talk about the different things. He says, I know now why you said what you did. Let's finish the story. Here's a strike. Here's where somebody gets hurt. They finally set it down for a hearing. When they set it down for a hearing, they asked me, what do you think of it? I said, I can tell you in advance that these men are going to serve some time. I don't care what we do, how we tried, or what happens. In this County is what's going to happen. I said, if we can plea bargain it, let's try it. Maybe they had been in jail a fair amount of time. Maybe we can use that towards the time that they get them out. Not that I like it, not that I want it, but
DeKalb County in 1940 or thereabout.
these are the facts of life. They talked to these guys. These guys said, well, we don't want any plea bargain to begin with. I go talk to the district attorney. He ain't about to plea bargain. We gonna try these men. We gonna try them. And they did. The International Union had a lawyer by the name of Del Fuston. No, H.G.B. King. Del Fuston was in his office. H.G.B. King was the labor lawyer in Chattanooga, Tennessee. He did a fair amount of criminal cases in addition. When they suggested that maybe he should help me, I said, be my guest. I knew he was a stem winder, a good Baptist, tobacco chewing almost guy. He didn't chew tobacco, but he fitted in with the rednecks. Bring him down. We tried it. Every one of them got convicted, from 1 to 5 years. Every one of them. And give them the time that they served in jail until the end. The DA picked the one that they said threw the rock is the first one, and they got that conviction. Then the rest of them went just bing, 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 with lesser conviction. When we got through, I remember King saying, you know, I thought things were bad in Chattanooga, but he said I hadn't been in DeKalb County, because, you know, at that time Chattanooga was much better organized and labor oriented than any other town almost except Birmingham. And Atlanta didn't even begin to compare with it. But that's what happened to our men in that darn thing. The quarry workers succeeded in organizing that place. We had a hell of a time getting a contract. My recollection was that we beat our brains out. If the people hadn't really stuck to it, we wouldn't have gotten what we did get. But we finally got a contract, didn't have the check off of union dues, didn't have any seniority that meant anything. It meant we had to strike again if we were to succeed in doing anything. The only reason that we were able to get one, in my humble opinion, is that that company, instead of being altogether a granite company like they were, had decided that the granite waste that they had, that they would break it up and sell it as grit to the chicken farmers in this state. Now, why would they sell it as grit to the chicken farmers? Very simple thing in our capitalist system. Before they take the chickens to the market, they give them a last meal of grits, of this grit that they call it grits, by the way, of marble grit. It gets into their gullet. It weighs 1/4 of a pound. That 1/4 of a pound is that much additional profit for those chickens, and they still do it. It is still being done today. They still feed them grits. As a matter of fact, if you go to they have this big poultry show here in Atlanta. It's one of the biggest, by the way.
I've been to it.
If you will go there, you will find that this Lithonia Granite Company has booths there, and there are now other companies similar to it in other places that instead of throwing the grit away, they'll do that. Having said that, that's the story for now. You know, we represent the coach, a man named Jones.
Oh, I've been reading about it, David Jones.
That's right, and Harris was at the hearing last night that they brought against him where they pitched him out. Trouble with Jones is that he did too good a job as a coach and teacher, and all of the other schools, he's a white man, all the other schools have black coaches. Although he's white, he's married to a black woman. And his school has attracted these black young athletes. These other coaches he has beat consistently in the last several years. They've been trying every way they knew how to get rid of him. They've been trying to poison whatever. We going now?
We're going to homegrown radicals because you mentioned, you know, what you called homegrown.
You got one from the left and one from the right.
That's right.
That's
Start with Nance and move on to.
all right. Well, as you know, Nance was a printer. He had worked at the Ruralist Press. He was a leader in their setup. He was an ambitious man. If you knew Steve, he must have stood 6 feet 2 or 3, probably weighed 250, 300 pounds. He was a big man. With that big a body, you would think that he had one of those loud, resonant voices. No, it was one of those quiet voices that, earnest but quiet. He, though, unlike many of the leaders in that time, had a real desire to see people organized in unions. In other words, he was not even though he came out of a craft, he was not craft to the extent that if you could organize an industry or a plant or something of that kind, that he didn't want to see it done. When the CIO first got started, he probably was as prominent a leader in Atlanta as anyone that we have, and in the state. I'm just trying to remember now. He was either the president of the state federation or of the city federation. I think it was state.
I think it was state.
And the CIO, in coming down, he was looking for somebody. They wanted somebody to help them. They had undertaken, they could not get Gorman of the UTW to come in with them, so they had undertaken to set up a textile workers organizing committee, and they had tied that in with the hosiery workers union, who that time were in the Berkshires, and it was before Emil Reevy too. I can't remember the guy's name now. These things get away from you. But anyway, they had tied in with that too. They were willing to see what they could do. They kept looking and looking, and they finally made a pass at Steve. And when they made a pass at Steve to put him on the payroll to head up what they call the Textile Workers Organizing Committee, he took it. I know that I had a lot of discussions with him at that time. I would suspect, because I was about the only labor lawyer here, I was, and he wanted me to come with him because he knew that I represented the hatters and the garment workers, the ILG, and that he said was akin and close to the textile workers, and in those days, he was talking about, and I was receptive to it, having like a council of the ILG, the Hatters Union, the Men's Clothing Workers Union, and the Textile Union, and the Hosiery Union, and use that as a real push in what we call the soft good industry. He was disappointed when I didn't come with him. And the reason I didn't come with him, because if you remember at that time, Dubinsky was sitting on, as I call it, on both sides. He was part of the organizing committee, but he never gave up his membership in the AFL. And Zaritsky never went as far as Dubinsky did. And the reason he didn't is because he had just succeeded in, when he stepped in as president, in merging the Hatters Union, which was a separate union, with the Millinery Union. He came out of the Millinery Union. In order to merge the two, as he said, the Millinery Union really was to swallow the Hatters Union. They were bigger than the Hatters, although the Hatters was probably claimed to be the oldest AFL union that there was in existence. And a man named Lawler, I forget his first name now, Lawlor, was the head of the Hatters Union. And when they set it up, they agreed that Zaritsky would be the president and Lawler would be the secretary treasurer. And while they would one union, there were a lot of separate things that they did on their own in terms of what they were doing. And of course, Lawler was interested substantially in the label. And that was a funny thing. The Hatters Union had succeeded in organizing men's hats primarily because of the label. Men were wearing overalls with a label in them. There was no such thing as work pants, it was overalls. Shirts with labels in them, suits with labels in them, hats with labels in them. For a long period of time, when they first got together, as I understand it, they kept the label treasury part of the division that Lawler had full control over, in terms of seeing that the label was in everything and the money came in and all this other business. In the final analysis, though, what happened, everybody thought what happened, that is that they took over the Hatters Union, and as these people died off, why the milliners assumed it. Steve Nance helped them recruit in the South the staff. He got people who were preachers. Witherspoon Dodge came in. What was the gal?
Lucy Mason.
Lucy Mason. His idea was that in order to organize the textiles people in the South, you couldn't do it by outsiders, so to speak. People who did not live in the South, who did not work in the South, who didn't know the Southerners. And he, accent-wise, philosophically wise, that they could adapt themselves better. And he helped to recruit a lot of people whom, in my opinion, no one else probably might have gotten, if you follow me. It's true at that time there was a lot of stir among liberals, among do-gooders, among what I call the genteel philanthropists who didn't have a great deal of money, but they wanted to help. They wanted to, just like after because he was the one that led the Teamsters, why he began to build a name for himself in the labor community, and he was a guy who would get out and work. I mean, really get out and work. Now, he was also a plain old good redneck. At one time, Abbey was a member of the Ku Klux Klan.
Is that right?
That's right. When I tell people that, they say, oh, come on. I don't know that he was active, But I know more than one time when I talked to him in those days, and he was with a chauffeur and teamster setup, he didn't hesitate using the word nigger, which was the word that was used to describe a black man. I've used it myself too. But if you would have said that a black man should drive a cab at that time, he'd probably have told you that mind your own damn business, that you're messing up his works. They were all white drivers. He succeeded in organizing them by reaching out to the owner of the thing with someone whom Abby knew, who knew the owner, and I'm trying to remember the name because that guy owned the Yellow Caps for a long time till he finally sold them off, and when he sold them off was when they were first beginning to get some real trouble in the cabs, and when they finally lost the union that they had in cab. And the way Abby had figured out that you don't do it by the hour. They weren't being paid by the hour, they were being paid by a percentage. And what he was doing was that he was raising the percentage, and he was doing things like that, requiring them to check the cabs because guys were going out on the cabs and getting stuck. It was a competition as to who would get the new cars, who would get the old cars. He worked out a system so that everybody got a chance. In other words, not that one guy rode a new car all the time, but if you had a good car today, you might have to have a fair one tomorrow and the bad one the next day. But everybody got a chance to make a decent living out of it. And as a result, he had a good, strong union. And the Teamsters have always been a cooperative union. The cabs were equally as much that way. He kept on working with them until finally he had a chance to switch to the Laundry Workers Union. And he started on them. He had a little office. It was near where he had that that he'd built up a little Teamster office too, but he was also close to where Googe had his office. Everybody was trying to get
Googe was over here
in the Hurt building on the 10th floor. And I remember it so well, he came off the elevators, and there was you know how the Hurt building looks from outside? There was a corner almost like that, and right there on the door was AFL, George Googe, regional director. And then he had an office, a secretary's office. What was the lady's name that was with him for years? God, that shows you how things get away. She came out of a union family. She used to keep track of his appointments for him. If she didn't, he would have been in such a mess, because while George was a printer and knew how to write and everything else, he just never did keep his appointments straight. Anyway, that's where Abby had it, and he started organizing. And at that time, the big organization was not linen service like it is now, but there were laundries in this town. This was the day before the home laundries. There was one chain of 10 laundries here that belonged, I think it was the Atlanta Laundry Company. One of them was the American Laundry, and then they had all different kinds of names. And the reason I remember the American Laundry is because it used to be over there on Whitehall Street, not far from where the plumbers had their office. And a number of things fit in here. I'm struggling trying to practice law, and in the course of doing it, I'm handling a lot of what I call collections, grocery stores who were men in the workman's circle, and then I'm picking up one here and there, and then there's some lawyers in the Herbert Hass's office. There was lawyer Joe Brown and Saul Golden, who just died, in Ellis Arnold's office, and Herbert Hass was the big wheel in it. They represented the laundry chains. one bright day, Joe Brown, who's been handling the collections in there, calls me up and says, would you like to handle the laundry collections? That's like manna from heaven. This is before I ran into Abby. And sure enough, I collected accounts from these different people. More problems in that, I'm telling you. You ruined this, you didn't deliver this, you spoiled this, you tore this. I used to tell Joe Brown that if anybody had something that was about to disintegrate, they'd send it to the laundry. It disintegrated, they'd say, the laundry, pay me. Pay me. But anyway, so I knew a little bit about it. Abby starts to organize them. So the first thing that we were trying to do was to organize the so-called independents, because we figured the chain was too damn big. We found out, though, that there were certain advantages in the chain that were not in the independents, because the independents, why some of the employers were so close to the employees that they could do anything to them and pay them nothing, and it would be okay. And you're talking about a era where the wage structure is 20 cents an hour and 25 cents an hour and 30 cents an hour is the kind of a structure that if you mentioned working for that kind of money today, they'd look at you like you were crazy. We eventually organize a few of the independents, but we succeed in organizing the chain. And the basis that I remember of us being able to do it was that we had, and here's where you blacks come into Abby's life, where the blacks are in all of these, primarily black women, and Abby is smart enough so that as soon as he gets 2 or 3 that are active, he makes them stewards. He gives them a button. Some places they could wear them, some places they couldn't. That makes them a big wheel. Here's the first white person who has raised them up. They swear by him. And then Abby also had a habit that if they had a complaint or had a grievance, he would see to it that it was handled. He did not let it ride. That's the difference between the way his organization in the latter years operated as compared to now. He was right on the ball. This chain was Jewish ownership.
Is it Sunshine?
No, sir. This chain, well, most of them have disappeared now from the chain. There was a Goldstein that was in it, not any kin to these Goldsteins. And then I keep trying to remember the name of the man at the American Hat Company. Hell of a nice guy who I think was substantially responsible for persuading the others who ran the different laundries. See, what had happened was that these were laundries that they had picked up. 2 or 3 of them had gotten together, set up one business, then kept spreading and picking up others, and most of these were operated by Jewish ownership or Jewish operators. They brought them in. They all were on the board of directors and the operation of it. And he was the one who persuaded them that the smart thing to do, he'd been doing some checking on Abby when we had succeeded, in getting one laundry here and one laundry here, and in each instance their experience had been good with them. If he thought they had a grievance, he handled it right. If he thought they didn't have a grievance, he told the people without wasting his time and their time and building them up, pumping them up, that you can't get anywhere. And he used to tell them real plainly, we got an agreement that it's not that good, ain't gonna be that good, because this is not the automobile industry, this is not the steel workers industry, this is not the miners industry. We can only go so far. And they understood that because he was honest with them. Anyway, He got the chain, built up a good relationship with them, and then little by little began to hack away at the National Linen Service. And in doing it, succeeded in organizing a substantial union. And as he worked with these people, I used to look at him and say, I'm amazed. He, long before some of our labor people he shook hands with, long before they hugged them, long before they kissed them, long before they greeted them, long before they placed them in positions of leadership, he was doing it. It was his union. And he made sure that if they had anything on the ball, it didn't make a damn bit of difference to him whether white or black, and they had to be black because the percentage of white was so damn small.
Black women's
90%, 95%. The drivers were white.
for the trucks.
The trucks. That's what helped us organize. His relationship with the Teamsters.
I see. Okay.
Until the time that he died, today, the Laundry Workers Union pays 5 cents per head per member to be affiliated with the Teamsters. If you look at his stationery of that union, it says affiliated with the Teamsters. Now, there were times when it didn't help him. In campaigns out of town and in other places where we're trying to organize new plants, they used to point to it and then tell all the horror stories, you know, about the Teamsters and Hoffa and Beck and you name it, and who knows. That's what was part of the key. People wanted to know how he do it. That was part of it. In those days, originally, they were either in the Teamsters, or if they were not organized, and Abbey went in, the Teamsters would help him to organize, or if he could organize them, he organized them, got his contract, and then arranged to give them to the Teamsters. That's how he was able to build the unit he did. One time he had, I guess, 10 or 11,000. They don't have it today. If they've got 4,000 today, and this was with all the National Linen plants. And today, because of the change in the industry, they are not these big laundries. So that went to hell. And as that went to hell, why, if he hadn't have done the linen service places, he would have lost it.
When did the big commercial laundries begin to replace the old washerwoman, you know, and I mean, when did they come in?
Oh, that was before the 40s, and it goes back.
Mm-hmm.
The first was the Chinese laundry at the corner. And then the next thing to it was the commercial laundry with the routes. They used to come by and pick up your stuff and deliver your stuff.
I was just curious, when did the commercial laundries come in here? Do you know? I mean,
I couldn't tell you.
teens or 20s or?
I would think it would be a little after that, because I think it came along, well, it would probably be in the 20s, and the reason I say that is because I can remember now in my mind's eye that in a couple of the plants that it showed horse and wagons
Right.
with the laundry name on it. And, well, for example, I told you there was the American Laundry on Whitehall Street. There was one of them over here. You know where Scripto is?
Yep.
There was a big laundry right in that area there. And one of those buildings that Scripto is in, if I remember correctly, was the laundry, and that was the Houston laundry, and it was down on Jackson Street instead of Boulevard and Houston. It was right there on the corner. And that was one of the laundries. And then there was one, you know where Sears Roebuck is now? There was another one over there in that area that I think now is a big grocery store of some kind, or converted to it. But I would think that would have been in the 20s, because that's when the shift came from the horse and wagon to the automobile. I got to tell you a story, though. We go to the War Labor Board in the days of the War Labor Board, and we ask for a wage increase for these people. And if I remember correctly, that the question was, should the wage increase go from whatever it was, in the lower 20s to 30 cents an hour. And the board had the authority to give them that and give them a week's vacation with pay. Let me see, and seniority if we didn't have it. And I believe those were the three major things. There may be a fourth one, but the board substantially had set a national policy which said you could get that. Oh yeah, it was 1 week for 1 year and 2 weeks for 5 years. So we're preparing the case, and Herbert Haas, who's in the same building I'm in, and Joe Brown, who had given me these accounts and so on, he's going to represent the laundries. We go to the hearing, and the hearing is tripartite.
Right.
Management, public, labor.
Right.
We find that a man named Tony Valenti, and that's how I met Tony,
Okay.
who heads up the textile union, is going to be the labor man there. So he comes down, and here he is, good-looking Italian boy, and Tony was always vain and liked his appearance to be just so. And there's a management person on there who comes from one of the big associations of laundry people in another end of the country. And then the middleman was a Catholic priest. Most of them were either Catholic priests or Episcopalian priests off the Unitarian weren't that big at that time, off the liberal side of the priesthood, or it would have been a academic as the third man. We go to the hearing. The hearing is at the old Civic Center, which is where the Alumni Hall is of GSU,
Municipal auditorium.
and we prepare for it. So I tell Abby, get as many of your people as are out of work to come up, I said, in the worst clothes that they got. Bring them up there. In the meantime, we take what money we had then, and I get a hold of a photographer who had been taking photographs of the Workman Circle people for years, and we go around and we pick every worst house of every laundry worker that we could, and we get those people to as witnesses to show what their conditions are and why they got to have more money.
Right.
And particularly we were looking for those that had the one woman taking care of the family and no husband there to support, so as to really hit the bottom of the thing. So how do you handle it? This was my first experience, I think, where I put stuff on a great big cardboard, and I had these big pictures. I had them blown up, you know, they were about the size of this or a little bit bigger.
Like
Where you-
8 by 10.
Yeah, or,
something like
or maybe just a little bit larger. And I had, if I remember correctly, I had 6 on each one of these boards, and I got a big stack of them there. We proceed, and I go forward with it. And as I hit each one, why, here comes this poor black woman who looks like her clothes are almost in tatters. She sits down, and I identify, and if she had 10 children, I got out to 10 children, and where she lives, and is this your house, and how many rooms are in it, and what kind of furniture have you got in it? Is the furniture paid? No. It's all installment. How much you have to pay a week? How much do you still owe on it? What is your rent on, and on what's your electric bill? I had a whole series of questions. We start going through that, and I guess we must have gone at it for about an hour until finally the company lawyers on the other side asked for a recess. I never will forget. Herbert Haas was an old lawyer at that time. Herbert Haas, though, was, while he may have been a good lawyer in many other things, on labor relations he knew very little.
Mm-hmm.
And Herbert Haas was also a coward. Why did I say he was a coward? Herbert Haas had gotten a hernia, and he was told that you ought to have it operated. And he was so damn scared of the knife, he never would get it operated, and kept getting bigger and bigger on him. But when he walked, he had to have his pants made real broad, right through here so that you couldn't tell that he had this big hernia hanging there. He comes over and says, Joe, why didn't you take pictures of some of the houses where the people live in better houses? I said, well, you know, I figured that if I brought these, that you would then bring those.
Right, right.
But he didn't have time to, if you know what I mean. Anyway, we go through this thing. I don't have to tell you, we won the thing. Tony had no trouble with persuading the priest to go with us on the thing. We did a fantastic job on it. That's how I got to know Tony. We talked to him. It went on for 2-3 days. Oh, the company brought in figures from all of these plants of how much money they were making, how much money they weren't making, all this other business. You know, they brought the finances in, we brought the sympathy in, and our people were there. They were having a ball. I'm telling you, they were having a ball. That's Abbey. But the point that I make again is that by now, color doesn't mean anything to him. I don't know if I told you the incident that we had in Birmingham at the courthouse, did I?
With Bull Connor's
Bull Connor.
predecessor.
With the sheriff who was there
Right.
and who made us stay on the balcony now.
Right.
That again was Abercrombie. Where there were in some towns more whites than blacks, and where some of them grumbled a little bit about whether they should be in the same union, one union. And that was what he did all the way through. In other words, he wasn't about to separate them at all. And the reason I say that is because in some small towns, and now I'm talking primarily, there were little towns in Florida where there may not have been as many blacks in the plant. There were more whites, and there were a few blacks, and they tried to say, we don't want them in our union. He didn't budge on the thing. He put them on his executive board. We worked out a structure after we started spreading out of Atlanta. And the spread out of Atlanta came with National Linen Service. With National Linen Service, for a long period of time, we had to win the election in every plant. We had to go through an election. At first, they used to contest the election. By the way, again there, we ran into Herbert Haas. His law firm represented this outfit too. We'd have to go through the election. They would fight us. We would win the election. That's where I first got a lot of respect for a lot of the black people, because they would sign the card. Time came to vote, they stayed with us. They didn't do like they did in the textile plants where they were white and they were ambivalent. Today they okay and tomorrow they lost. They used to say, we ain't got nothing now. If we lose, we ain't gonna have nothing, so we can't lose nothing. Just that plain, just the three ways. If we win, we got more than we got now. Whatever it is, we got more. And that was the kind of attitude. And that, by the way, was, in my opinion, distinguished the 60s from the 80s, where the blacks stuck together. They had nothing. They didn't have what I call the middle class climber, yuppie elite who wanted to be better than the other black. They respected a picket line. Today, they step over each other. They step on each other. They're fighting for leadership. They're fighting for the same ills that afflict what I call the so-called white community. Same goddamn thing. No respect for a picket line. No respect for the fact that you're taking somebody else's job. No respect for the fact that if I turn around and take your job, that the boss may be using me, and then if he wins, so I got a job but you haven't, but if you beat him, I ain't got nothing, well, so I ain't got nothing. I'll go find me another job. For a long time, whenever we would call strikes, and I don't care what the industry was that I worked with, or what the craft was that I worked with, we could rely on the blacks. Time after time, I have heard blacks on, oh, I guess you'd call it a strike committee, where you're getting ready for the strike, say, don't worry about us. Ain't nobody gonna cross our picket line. Ain't none of us gonna go back to work. Couldn't say that about the white people. You can't say that today about the black people either. It's a dog-eat-dog thing, and I think, well, of course, I have my own ideas about what's created it. But part of what's created it is this incessant drumming about you got a chance to be a big person and get $1 million and get rich and all this other, and where we once looked around us to be our brother's keeper, we ain't looking around, or our sister's keeper. We ain't looking around at it anymore. It's dog eat dog, and that dog eat dog ain't gonna do it until there's a real shift of it.
What had led Abby to move into the laundry business anyway? Who had come out of this kind of background with these kind of attitudes, this sort of union, etc.
I would say, if I judge it right, that is, he messed around with the Teamsters, and he ran into, when you work with the Teamsters, he ran into the drivers out of the laundry trucks. And while I can't say that this is what happened, I would suspect that what happened was that at some meeting, an international representative of the laundry workers was around. He's looking for somebody, and he asks Abby, and Abby at that moment says yes. But he'd already organized the Teamsters. There was no more challenge. In other words, there was nobody else. The yellow cab had a monopoly. That, by the way, is how Abby got into politics, too. How'd he get into politics? Okay. The city gave franchises. There was only one franchise, and I can't think of the man's name. And they used to have the office right behind, where the block further down on Cortland, where it's not Southern Bell, but the next street. And on that side of the street, that's exactly where the office was that headed the taxi cab company.
Okay.
And if you were a politician, you called for a cab, you didn't pay. He had the franchise, the only one. The fight was on. Other people tried to get in. Part of what Abby did in order to take care of his own Teamsters was to make sure that franchise continued. That's how he got to talking with the people in the city hall. That's how he got to know the mayor. That's how he got into politics. And it was a natural to him. He had, Abby's instinct was to do things. And the instinct was, how do you do it? For a long time, I used to tell Abby, you pick good people and you listen to good advice and you follow it. And then there were many times that I used to tell him, Abby, you're getting where you don't pick good people and you don't listen to good advice and you follow bad advice and get yourself in trouble. And a good part of that developed after Archer.
Tommy Archer.
Now, not the Archer of the operating engineers, but an Archer. There was an Archer in the Teamsters Union. There was a real bad Teamsters strike. A number of them were accused of dynamiting. Archer was one of them. He was convicted. He went to jail. When Abby came out, when Archer came out, the Teamsters had changed politics, new leadership. They turned their back on him because they were afraid that if we do get too close to them, they'll say we're jailbirds and all this other baloney. This man asked Abby for a job. I remember we kicked it around at some length. He finally said, we're going to give him a chance. And I thought that was the right thing too, because the man had been a good, hard worker, good organizer for the teams to work with and all. And that man was as loyal as the day was long, till the very day of his death. And Abby had groomed him to be his successor, because he was a younger man than he was. But what happened was Archer had gotten to the stage where he used to negotiate all the major contracts. What he would do was bring them right up to the last meeting. Then he'd call Abby in, and Abby would come in and give it his blessing and conclude it, and so on and so on, and off he went. He was quite content to be number two. He was never there to try and take anything away from Abby. Loyal as the day is long. Goes over to Jackson, Mississippi. Good health. I saw him the day he left. Lands over there, meets with his committee at supper, walks into the hotel dining room, sits down to start talking to him, and keels over dead. Aneurysm, back of his head or somewhere. Just like that. And there went all of the future of the laundry union, and in my mind was a substantial turning point in that laundry workers union. He had Carl Jones on the organizing staff. He had Lonzo Robinson out of Memphis on the organizing staff. He had others. None of them had the ability. He hired any number of people who were blacks. He brought them out of the laundries any number of times, made organizers out of them. Never could find one that could catch fire and would really go to town for him. He asked me about recommending somebody. I recommended a man named Estes, who had worked for me in the Textile Workers Union over in Arkansas and Mississippi and West Tennessee. And Estes was a good man on organizing under close supervision. I never had a day's trouble with him. His wife used to travel with him too. Abby gives him a certain amount of direction, turns over an area to him, and then doesn't watch him as closely as I used to watch people. The next thing I know, Abby calls me up one day. He says, "I fired Estes." I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "That SOB, he's out there campaigning for my job." I said, "Estes?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "You're crazy." He says, "No." I said, "How do you know?" And then he told me how he found it out and everything else. I said, "Well, I got to tell you, I'm surprised. I never thought he had it in him." I said, I knew he was a good man and a hard worker, but I never thought that he'd ever aspire to step into a place like yours where you've got to plan, maneuver, strategy, think things through and all that. I said, all I know is that when I give him work to do, tell him what I wanted done, see that it was done, not a minute's trouble. And that's exactly what happened. I laugh about it because afterwards, when Abby would be talking about hiring somebody and he'd ask me about it, I said, I'm the right one. And he knew what I was talking about. That's how Abby got where he did. In his later years, Abby developed what I call an ego streak. He had to have one to begin with in order to, and that was, at any time he could get an honor of some kind, he wanted, it could be as insignificant as hell. And as you know, he fixed, before he died, he had fixed up a room over at their office, which he called Abercrombie's room or something like that. He had all these plaques, all of these governor's awards and all of these things on the thing, and gifts that his membership had given him at conventions and all this. I used to shake my head and I said, I would never have believed it, but that's exactly it. And then in the later years, and I'm giving you both sides of the thing now, I fell out with Abby more than one time. I remember there was a a campaign that he wanted to put on, some strategy he wanted to use, and I kept saying, you can't do it that way, because here's what's going to happen. And here are the blind alleys you're going to get in, and we're going to wind up spending thousands of dollars, going to lose the thing, and you may very well get into problems where it's going to cost you money, where somebody can turn around and assess the union for damages or something of that kind. He wouldn't listen to me. I said, well, Abby, you go ahead, let's us part ways. And we did. And this was in Louisiana. And we did, and we parted ways, and I guess it must have been 2 years, 3 years later, one bright day I get a call. I hadn't talked with, I'd seen him at meetings somewhere, you know. I got to talk to you. I said, are you sure? He said, yeah. So sure enough, we get together, and Abbey boasted that he was the first union labor man that belonged to the Commerce Club over here opposite the CNS. Now, I know how he got to be a member there. National Service Industries belonged up there. They sponsored him. They got him in there. And yeah, well, it was Weinstein before Zabin. It was Weinstein who did it. I am. He takes me up there. I said, Abby, both of us are out of place. I don't know what the hell we're doing here, but I said, I'm glad you're picking up the tab, because I sure as hell wouldn't.
Really?
And and then he tells me that the sad story of what had happened. And I said, yeah, I'm sorry to hear it. I said, the only question in my mind is how many thousands of dollars you threw away there that didn't have to be thrown away. Well, that's not what he wanted to talk to me about.
Okay.
Wanted me to start representing him again. And I did. And there were a couple of other times that we, as I call, divorced ourselves. That was primarily in the pension and health and welfare funds. Those are plans that are highly technical. The government, through two departments, the IRS and the Department of Labor, keeps an awful close watch on. And I used to tell him that he had his trustees. He appointed the union trustees, and he in effect appointed the management trustees, with the exception that National Linen had somebody on, and they used to say amen pretty well to whatever he said, because they weren't interested in that. They were interested in making money, which they've always done. I gave him some kind of advice ahead of a trustees meeting, and I thought I had persuaded him not to bring the thing up. He brought it up, got it passed. I didn't say anything. The meeting was over. I walked out. I didn't tell him goodbye, anything else. I let it ride for a few days, and I got a call from him, and I wouldn't answer it. I believe he came by the office, and when he came by, I, of course, let him come in. He said he called me, and I hadn't answered him what was the matter. I said, what would you think was the matter? Well, you really didn't know. I said, you got an awful damn short memory. I said, do you remember our conversation before the meeting? Oh, yeah. Well, he knew damn good and well what it was. He knew that I was mad. Well, but, you know, we ought to try it. Let's do it. I said, we ain't going to do it. I said, you want to do it, you do it. You get another lawyer and let him handle it. That's when he reached out and got Charlie Elrod of the, Charlie Elrod was originally a partner to a man named Henkel, and Henkel came out of Columbus, Georgia, and I had all kinds of fights with him in the textile industry. I knew he was no damn good. Well, Henkel later on became a tax lawyer and moved to Atlanta. Elrod was with him. He hired Elrod. He kept him for a period of time. One bright day, he calls Harris. And in his latter years, whenever there was a disagreement between us, he called Harris, and Harris was, he says, we got some problems in with the Department of Labor, and we'd like for you folks to represent us. And of course, Harris knew that we weren't representing them and knew why and so on. He said, well, don't you have Mr. Elrod doing it? Yeah, he says, we do, but that may be part of our problem. Would your dad represent us? And Harris said, I don't think you're going to get him to represent you. And he says, I'd have to talk to him before I do. Then he tells Harris something along the lines, well, if we can get you to say you will, before we get through, we know your dad will be working on it, and we think he can help us straighten the damn thing out. And sure enough, Harris talked to him and said, well, what the hell, you've been friends so long, come on, help him out, on and on and on and on. So I say, okay. And we get into it, and we find a mess the like of which you would not believe, that should never have happened, where the Internal Revenue Service is telling them that they're going to levy a fine, having investigated it, of $300,000 on one item and something else on another. And I said, where the hell are we going? And besides the publicity. Anyway, make a long story short, we went to work on it. We were able to persuade them to follow a procedure which they could follow, and that was where they could turn around and get an administrator to handle the fund, clear the thing out, or to make recommendations in the handling of it. And in the course of the discussion with the federal people, I had said that we'd like to suggest some people who are administrators who could help do it. And we finally got them to agree to that. And I picked a man that I knew real well, not from Atlanta, not from this end of the South, but from Louisiana. And he came in. I knew it would cost him some money to do it, and it did. But the man took on the work. I'm just about to get the thing concluded with no penalties. And this man, Norman Ross, who is the so-called controller for the Laundry Workers Union, black man, who came to work for Abercrombie as a bookkeeper, and who Abby let him have enough time off so he could study becoming a CPA, and who finally passed as a CPA, who still works for the union, and who is a CPA running a CPA business now. He, in talking with one of the agents for the feds who was a black, had said that he thought that he could help settle it on a $50,000 penalty.
Huh?
And I hear this, I almost split a gut. That's another time I almost left him, and I think Abby pulled an act for me. He called him in, balled him up, one side, down the other, and didn't fire him, of course. I didn't want him to fire the man. What I wanted to do was turn loose of it because there's too many cooks already. But anyway, we got it straight. We rocked along on that for some time. I helped Abby set up this thing where he, a scholarship for the members' children of the where they raise money. Of the laundry workers, I helped him develop the clauses in his contract so we could do it. I was on the board. I was the lawyer for it. A lot of other things. And then he, and I used to write his speeches for him on public occasions and so on. About that time, Al Cara had become the AFL civil rights character. And Al was pumping him up about this scholarship thing and so on, about what a wonderful thing it was. Of course, I think that Al was trying to see if he could work in some way of developing a bigger fund with Abby helping lead it for blacks and so on and so on. And he put him on the board. About that same time was when we were setting up this business down at Georgia State University. Gracie had left. Freed was coming in. Al Cara had not okayed Freed, so he was not happy about it. He was pumping Abby up so that Abby was not happy with Freed. When Freed left, and what's his name? Schmidman came in, and he was not consulted on it while he was tearing the roof on it. And I found that as Abby was getting older, that he was, there were times when I was wondering whether he was really listening to people or whether he was losing some of his sense of judgment. And I think that some of it, he was making more mistakes than what he should have been making, that he would have made 20 years ago. Anyway, there was a meeting of the laundry workers where, you know, he met once a year. He called all of his people in, and they met the whole, it was one local union all over the area, and he had them in 11 cities. They used to meet each month in the shop or in the town, and he had a steward who was in charge of it, plus his organizer who would come in. But then once a year they would do whatever the so-called plenary session and listen to everything, all the real problems. They'd have people who were helping them develop the health and welfare fund. We had all kinds of educational programs that we used to have at that time. He'd bring his folks in, and so many of them had never been in a hotel in their lives. He introduced them to hotels. So many of them had not had banquets in their lives. He introduced them to that. All these sort of things. He didn't hesitate, for example, when we were working with the Israeli movement and Histadrut, the trade union movement, he didn't hesitate to bring people in from that to help educate them and to get some affinity with them and so on. But at one of those meetings that we had, he got Cara to fix up a talk that he made that was it was one of these promise in the sky business. And Abby really had never promised people the sky. And that's one of the things that I have found is the worst thing in the world you can do with trade union is you go promise and somebody will remember, and if you can't deliver to begin with, don't promise. Anyway, he makes the talk, and I'm there. I'm at the head table with everybody else, and I'm having a fit. And this is when it was in an year somewhere in the probably early 80s, where there was like a little depression and business was off, even with the service places, and we were having some real problems in the economy. And he's rolling with the wind. So he gets through, and I said, where the hell did you get all this from? After the meeting's over, you know, and we're mulling around talking to people and so on. Well, he had asked Al to draw it up. He'd always give you the idea of what he had on his mind, and then you could argue it out with him. And sometimes he would follow you, sometimes he wouldn't. If he wouldn't, it was inconsequential. I never got excited. And that's why he did it. I said, Abby, you're going to have problems with this thing. The first real revolt that he had in his union came after that. And when I say revolt, what I'm saying is, for the first time, his leadership was being challenged. And his challenge came from people on his executive board who were talking with Jones and who were talking with Robinson, who was talking with a gal who he later fired, who came out of the Atlanta linen supply here. And when that started happening, I said, Abby, forget it. you and I parting ways again. I said, you know, I like you all that, but when you make these kind of crazy mistakes, you go your way, I go mine. Because he used to say we were the brain trust, you know, when we'd sit down and talk. But if you're going to be a brain trust, you got to be part of the brain all the time. You can't be part of the time. So we separated again. And the truth of the matter is that when he died, we were not on the best of terms. Brian Ball, who we had gotten to know and who we pulled him into this through the organized labor workman circle and the fact that we had a lot of pension, health, and welfare funds, and we used his bank.
That's First Georgia, right?
Your First Union. Well, actually, we did it by his predecessor. There was a man named Haynes, who was the vice president when they were back over here where the First American is now, that Pharaon and all his crew are in. This man Haynes came by my office one day and saying he was visiting us because we had our bank account there and so on, and then he says, you know, we really don't get much business from unions. He says, I sure would like to see if we could get some accounts with them. He was a nice enough guy, friendly. So I said, well, the reason you don't, nobody else does, because nobody tries to woo them. And I told him about these different funds and so on. He says, I sure wish we could do something. Anyway, a week or 2 weeks later, he calls me up, says, would you give me names and addresses of the labor people? I said, the names are in the phone book. Yeah, but he says, you know, the name of somebody for me to talk to. This man was a Seventh-day Adventist. You know, they can be persistent. And he started. And I want you to know they picked up a tremendous amount of business. That's how he got to know Abby. That's how Bill Bryan was, excuse me, his successor.
Brian Ball.
Brian Ball, rather, was his successor. And he followed with the business that this man had started doing. And Abby and them became quite close. And when he set up this scholarship thing, he did not originally put Bill Bryan on, but when Brian Ball, I keep saying the other name. But when I stepped down, he had already begun to put him on. Before he died, he and Al had fallen out. And Al had come off of the thing. I attributed it to the fact that there were a lot of reverses that he'd been having in the union. He was having, his leadership was challenged. For the first time in one of the conventions he had probably 4 or 5 years before he died, he was not able to put a program through that he had worked on. There was, let me see, I think it was Carl Jones who had run for office against him, and he defeated him, but he couldn't fire him because if he did, he would split up his union. That's when Alonzo Robinson had lined up with him. Alonzo Robinson, though, and Carl Jones in a subsequent meeting lined up against Abbey, and when he did, they really took the organization away from him. When he finally died, while he was emeritus, and he can thank me for it, I had fixed up the Constitution so that he could become president emeritus and would have a life salary as long as he lived. And I got that passed a number of years ago. He was the emeritus then, and Robinson had already assumed the presidency, and he was like the fifth wheel on the thing. He maintained his position in his funds. I think he's had 4 sets of lawyers since I left it. As of this moment, Robinson still relies on Harris. I don't handle it at all because in my book, Robinson is an ineffective leader, and I don't know where that union is going either. And I hate to see where it's going. Carl Jones is still with him. the sad thing about it is that Abbey did not leave a successor who was worthwhile. That may determine what happens to it. Oh, I could tell you other things about it. For example, there was a union in Chicago that told Abbey that they wanted to merge with him. He was having trouble with his international union because his international union had fallen into some leadership that we believed and knew was the mafia. So he asked me to go up there with him. That was an experience. We roll up there. We get off the plane. This man is there to meet us. We go out to the car, and there's one of these long stretch black cars that when you sit inside, they can't tell who the hell's sitting in there, but you can look out. We go riding, and you know Chicago's a big town. We ride in the town and keep going, and as we keep going, I keep seeing we going through an industrial area, and then we're going into an area that looks pretty crummy to me. Finally, we stop at this in front of this place that looks like a store. The only difference between it and a store is that there are no windows. There's this door. We got all of our luggage in here. We haven't registered in the hotel yet. We get out, and this guy who's the chauffeur has another man with him. They go over there and they ring a button. Somebody says, "Who's there?" And they look through a slit, and we walk in. We walk through two doors that'll have to be unlocked by somebody. And we walk in there, and here's this fancy place, this big office there that looks like the presidential Oval Office or whatever the hell it is. And there's, I think it was 4 men in there. And if you saw them on a dark night, it'd scare the hell out of you. And I take a close look. They got guns on. I said, I don't know what the hell we got into. Abbey had told me he had talked with these people and, gave me the business of that they had X thousand members in Chicago. They were an independent union. A good number of their people were in the laundry workers. They had talked to the friends in the trade union movement. As far as they had been able to find out, they were not happy to go into the International because the International had some people in there that they did not want to get involved with. So I figured, well, they don't want to get involved. This is a mafia they don't want to get involved with. It sounds good. I could never figure out why the hell they wanted to come to tie up with Atlanta, right, except that in the laundry setup, there's an AFL union. It was a very weak union and had a leadership that didn't mean anything. Then there was Abbey's union, which was outside of the AFL, but affiliated with the Teamsters. And here was this other one, which said they had a number of people in Chicago in laundries that were not covered by the other. I originally asked Abbey, well, how can we get them involved? Because your International has some Chicago unions. Well, his theory was that if we get them together with us and we get along okay, then maybe we can tie them into the International Union so that then we have that many more. And anyway, in the course of the discussion, which did not last too long, I found that right quick that their theory of organizing was that they walked in, here's the contract, sign it, we represent them. How, when, where, after they sign the contract, they go into the plant and they sign it up. Not only that, but they did not have that number of laundry workers. Handful. They had something of everything that you would believe, most of which were very small units with very small owners, with either service setups or some kind of small production shop that they'd picked up. It ran the gamut, you name it, anywhere from a machine shop to a garment shop, to a laundry shop, to a food store, to a newspaper stand. And I'm sitting there with Abby, and I'm trying to figure out how the hell do you get out of this place and get out alive. Make a long story short, we got out, and we got out alive, and we never saw them again. When we left, Abby had talked to him, about what affiliation with being on and on, like he was interested,
Yeah, right.
which I thought was glad of, and I kept it going that way too, because I figured
More than at least.
who the hell knows? If we say no, they likely to wash us up, and we got out of there, and we left. I had one other experience with him. His union, which was charged in some areas with being infiltrated. One area was Cleveland, one area was Chicago, one area was Canada.
By the mob.
Yeah. He gets a call from the international office one bright day saying a certain man's coming down, and he's coming from Canada, who's supposed to be one of the mob people. And at this time, Abby was not getting along with the international union too well. And there was a period of time, this is a long history, and I don't know whether we want to go into all of it, but we had had just come through a period of time when a number of the local unions, including Abby was the largest in the international, other than the Chicago local, which we were never certain whether it was a paper local or whether it really was that large. And then there was one in San Francisco, which was number 2. There was one in Kansas City, which was another one. There was one in Oregon, but they had stayed in pretty close touch at that time with each other, because they also were unhappy with what the international was doing and with what effect it had on their organizing efforts, although Abby was the most aggressive in terms of organizing. So, and the local in San Francisco got into a rippet with the international union, and we went over there, Abby and I did, to see if we could help them out, and to see whether or not if the thing could not be straightened out, if they were going to secede and join the AFL. That was what was on the table at that time. Not join the AFL with the AFL union, but get a separate charter, which we had some talks with some of the wheels, and they had indicated that they might do that and make that other one affiliate with us. Okay. Of course, the other one was infinitesimal. But in any event, we go out there and we win the litigation that we're involved in with the international. Everybody, when we win it, why they decide they're going to shake hands and kiss and make up and all that, with one eye over your shoulder as to what's going to happen, We come on back and we get this notice that this man's coming in. And Abby says he's one of the mob. Abby got a permit to carry a gun. I met with them when the guy came in. What the international had come up with, as I remember, was that they were going to divide the international into territories under the supervision of somebody from the international office. Here's Abby as a vice president, and he's going to have somebody on top of him. I need not tell you what reception they got on the thing. This guy talked pretty tough. We had, in the course of preparing for the case in San Francisco, gotten all the material that we could in terms of their connection with the mob and everybody else, so that if we got to a knockdown and drag out fight on it, we would have to use it, we'd use it. When this guy came in and showed us the papers of what they had drawn as to how they were going to restructure the union, and they were down here to tell them this was in advance of their next convention, where they were going to put this thing through. We talked with them, and I fixed up a packet then of everything we had on them, and I made duplicate copies. Abby had one, I had one. I'm trying to remember, somebody else had the third one that we trusted, so if anything happened, it would be made available. As a matter of fact, I still have my copy here that I ought to do something with. But in any event, we then decided that the smart thing to do was to let the International know, if you try to do it, goodbye Atlanta and the other unions. And they had it that before they had their convention, they had a knockdown, drag-out fight in the executive committee where Abbey was one of the VPs. And he had sufficient strength with the locals that we got in touch with, because when they started doing it with him, they would certainly try to do it with them too. So by one vote, they licked them. And that cleared it for a while. That's the part of the Abercrombie story. There's a lot more, but we getting into
This
fields.
reminds me, didn't you appear before Congress or before Bobby Kennedy over the so-called racketeering?
That's right. That goes back in whatever the time is.
Like 54, 50?
That's the
What is it, really? 54,
that's
55?
when the news the newspaper in Washington came out with a headline, Meany called liar, or something like that. The United Textile Workers at a convention in San Francisco had been raised a question on the floor of the convention after they had talked to Meany several times and tried to persuade him to change his mind. They had decided to give a charter in the AFL-CIO to the other textile union. The UTW was chartered. They said, you got to either
TWA, right?
yeah, that was TWA. They said you either got to lift our charter
Right.
or else bring them in to our organization.
Right.
We had a number of meetings at that time, this goes back a number of years, where they were supposed to have tried to work it out. And I see that we're going nowhere. And I had advised the Valenti and Kleinert and their executive board that, in my opinion, that there had been some kind of a deal made. You know, you in this long enough, you can recognize it. And I thought that the deal was that what they were going to do was what actually happened, and that is that they were going to, if we could not get together with them, and they were reluctant to get together because they knew that they could get a separate one chartered within the AFL, and they didn't need to beg us or work out something on a basis of accommodation. Tony and Lloyd decided that they were going to raise it on the floor of the convention. I said I wouldn't do it. Because if you do, God help you with Meany. Because Meany, I knew based on what his reputation was, not the dealing that I'd had with him, is one of these guys that once you cross him, he reminds me of Tom Murphy. Never forget, never forgive, and if he can get you, he'll get you. And that's what he did. What happened was that they raised the question at the convention and asked the convention to support them in refusing a charter to these people if they could not reach an agreement. And I don't have to tell you that the convention did not support him. And he was mad, and I've seen people mad, but he was that.
Meeting.
That's right. Things rock along. It must have been either 2 or 3 years later, and we have this business of, what was the committee? It wasn't the McClellan Committee. What was the one after that?
Was it HUAC or
Who?
HUAC, Council on American Activities, or
No. This was another committee.
the McClellan Committee, subversive?
McClellan was the one that came along before this. There was another committee. Who headed this committee? God, that just shows you I would never believe that I'd forget.
A guy from New York with the K in his name, Senator.
With a K.
You know.
Oh, God. This committee was a congressional committee that when the AFL-CIO had set up a committee which said at that time that if any of their unions were allegedly corrupt, that they would investigate them, that they would throw them out, and all this other business. They did not do it that way. What they did was the Congressional Committee held the hearings. And if you remember, the bakery workers were one of them at that time. Who were the others? There were 2 or 3 others. Anyway, the Teamsters, yes, but the carpenters, no. It depended who. But in any event, they finally got to the United Textile Workers. What they got to the United Textile Workers was that the charges were that monies that had come in their defense fund were used by Valenti and by Clennert.
This is Lloyd Clennert.
Yeah, Lloyd Clennert, to purchase their houses. They bought some houses at that time. Clennert was the Secretary of Treasury. He was supposed to be the man. What actually had happened was that they had borrowed money from, what's the bank up there? Is it the American? It's a big bank there that was owned by the mine workers in Washington. Anyway, and they, in doing that, had put all of the monies that they had in the other banks for the International Union and the Defense Fund and everything else into that bank, and really had used the credit of the International Union for loans for themselves. And there was, at that time, they had a Washington lawyer that had advised them on investments in investing the funds of the International Union. And they had done some kind of a procedure there where it was contended that they took money from the International Union and used it wrongfully, on which they made some kind of a profit. And that the executive board and general counsel, and that was me, knew about it. And not only knew about it, but that we were part of it. That was the time that I saw Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy was questioning us. What the hell is the name of the committee?
Yeah, we can find it.
It's one of those committees that was set up by Congress,
Yeah.
I remember, but I
and it's not the McClellan Committee.
Mhm. It's before.
We'll-
I was thinking
we'll
of
find it.
Keating, but it's not Keating.
No. Anyway, Meany calls our executive board and me to meet with him. And accuses us of being part and parcel of all this business. He couldn't show that anybody got a dime, couldn't show that anybody done anything wrong. So we told him fly a kite. And we, at that meeting, in effect, we told him that what this smelled like was retribution for him giving them a charter, and now he was getting even. Well, he was going to pursue it. So he files charges in the AFL-CIO hierarchy, turns over his claims to the committee that Bobby Kennedy was a counsel for. And they set it for a hearing, and they subpoena all of us up there. The first ones that they put up were Clenat, Valenti, and this is part of the procedure up there. It's I probably could dig out what the facts were. Then they put me up on the thing. They could not find anything that I had done with respect to all this. So what did they go after me for? We had been letting our men buy cars. I had conceived the idea that if we could rent cars, it would be smarter.
Sort of like a lease today.
Yeah, lease cars. I check around. I say, hell, they want too much. So I come up with the idea that we will buy the cars under a setup that we will set up, and we will then lease the cars for much less to the International Union, and it'll save us money. And if there's a profit, somebody's got to administer it. Either we'll have somebody in the union do it, or I will do it. So they finally came to the conclusion, well, you came up with the idea, you administer the damn thing, you worry with it, we don't want to worry with it. After we try it for a while, if there's any real money, then we will move the administration of it into the International Union, and they'll make the money from it.
This is back 44, 45.
Yeah.
There. Yeah.
So I buy it, and I set the damn thing up, and I worry myself. I'm crazy. I worry myself with buying cars. I get bids and all this other stuff. I set it up. We're doing it at almost where it would have been extra. It's around 60% of what it would have cost us. And that's when you figure everything that you want to figure, depreciation, everything else that you can imagine. I remember I spent an inordinate amount of time with a couple of lawyers who helped me set the thing up, because I'd never gotten involved in this sort of thing before. So I get up on the stand, and they ask me to testify, which I do. And they, before I took the stand, though, Bob Kennedy sends for me. He wants to talk to me. We are there waiting. And that's when I had my one experience with him. He
That's been about 28 or something like that.
oh, he was young, as I call a young snot.
Right.
And he's standing up behind his desk. I walk in. He doesn't ask me to sit down. Joe Jacobs, yes. He doesn't reach out to shake hands with me, anything else. You've been subpoenaed to be a witness. Yeah. Okay. All right. I know. I figure I'm safe if I say a half hour. He says, you've been subpoenaed. He says, if you'll come clean and tell us the real truth on Valenti and Clenat so that we can put them in jail, we won't pursue you. I said, what do you mean? You won't pursue me? Well, if you don't, We believe before we get through, you'll be outside the labor movement. And you will no longer be counsel for the United Textile Workers. And I said, if I don't do it? He says, then I've told you what'll happen. I said, well, what do you expect me to tell you? In other words, I figured, let's find out what this SOB said. We expect you to put the finger on them. I said, put the finger what? That they did this, this, and this. They took money from the International Union. They didn't account for monies. And he has a whole list of stuff. I said, well, wait a minute. I don't know that. Oh, he says, I think you do. In other words, he's telling me what I'm supposed to say. I said, I'm saying to you, I don't know that. Oh, come on, he says, you couldn't have been their general counsel and not know what was going on. As a matter of fact, we've checked it out, and hell, really, when it comes down to it, we think you're the third man in running this setup and that you're equally as big as these other people are, Valenti and Kleiner. I said, well, you may think so, but I said, you know, the main office in Washington, I'm running the South. I'm the lawyer down the South. I'm general counsel. But I said, unless they tell me these things, how do I know it, what's going on in Washington? I said, now, when it deals with matters of the International Union, yeah, I know. But when you talk about these things, I don't have access. The biggest thing that, as I remember, was that he was telling me was that these are monies that they were claiming as expenses, and instead of using it as expenses, they had bought, well, for example, I remember one of them, because it stands out in my mind, they had bought tickets to My Fair Lady, any number, inordinate number of tickets, which apparently they had used. That I found out later in the testimony, they had bought these tickets, and when they would have meetings with manufacturers in New York, they would go to give them a couple of tickets to the theater. At that time, they were at a premium, and it was a big deal, you know. So how many did they buy? $1,000 worth, $2,000? I don't know what it meant. Did it get goodwill for them? I don't know either, but that's what the contention was. It was stuff like that. I said, how in the hell would I know something like that? Now, if you will tell me that on any expense accounts that I filed, and I used to file them on a weekly basis, or any that came across my desk from my staff that I knew, I said, I'll testify to that. But things I don't know, I'm not going to lie for you or anybody else. He looks at me real hard, and then he slams his fist down on the table. He says, you'll regret it. And he turns his back on me, and the son of a bitch walks out. I don't have to tell you what my feelings were about it. I went on out. I left there. We were not to be called. I think I was to be on the hook for a couple of days before they called me. This was just before we began it. I saw Tony, I saw Lloyd, I told them what happened. I not only told them, but I also told the executive board, who had also been subpoenaed there. I said, there's one thing about it. I may wind up in problems. I may not ever represent unions. I may be outside the trade union movement. But I'm not about to lie for any son of a bitch, much less to lie to put somebody in jail that I don't believe ought to go to jail. And I said, call it any way you want. And oh, there was quite a stir in the executive board, because a lot of the others had been subpoenaed but did not know what they allegedly were supposed to have known. Anyway, I appeared on the stand. I testified. And they used the automobile thing and said that actually I was making money out of it. And there were the records showing what it was. I think, yeah, that's correct. I was making money. I think I got $100 a month or whatever little amount it was for administering the goddamn thing, where I probably spent $1 zillion more. And then they asked me the question, Kennedy asked me the question, didn't Meany, when he came to your committee and talked to the executive committee, raise these questions? Meany had not raised any of those questions. I said, that's not so. Are you saying that he lied? I said, that's not so. He did not raise those questions. That's how the headline came. Make a long story short, as a result of all the turmoil, what happened was that the AFL-CIO committee turned around and found, and my good friend Alex Rose of the Hatters was on the committee, and he was and he could not persuade them not to put the UTW on probation and to exclude Valenti, Clenard, and myself from holding an office. Now, I never held an office. I was counsel. So in order to please Meany, so they said that I would not be counsel for them anymore, but that I would continue to handle whatever cases they had and complete them, period. That's when Alex Rose, after the decision came by, said, for one time in my life, I'm ashamed. He says, I couldn't help you. But he says, I want you to do something for me. He says, you spent a lot of time with that union, and I know that whatever living you've made from that. He says, I know we've never paid you what we ought to pay you. But he says, what I want you to do for the next year at least is to make as many speeches as you can for me on the Hatters label. I want you to be our representative. I looked at him, I said, well, hell, if I'm not good enough to be counsel for the United Textile Workers, how in the hell am I good enough to make speeches for you for the Hatters label? And, of course, to continue to be their lawyer and all that. He says, I did everything I could to stop them from putting your name in. But he says, Meany was adamant, and the rest of the committee is scared to death of him. So I said, what am I supposed to do then? Tell him that he didn't convince you? And by the way, he also told me that some of the members of the committee wanted to know why the hell I was included in it, and the theory was that since I was the general counsel that I knew all of these things were going on, or should have known, I guess. And that's what finally happened. And it's, I guess it, 3 years, 4 years, till I wound up a lot of the stuff that I'd been handling for them that were in various stages of it. By that time, the Clenard and Valenti, having not been able to hold an office, they had a new regime in the top of the United Textile Workers. They apparently did not persuade Meany, but what was the man who was the Secretary Treasurer? Electrician. Not Kirkland, before Kirkland. No, before Kirkland. They had talked with him, and he had said, hell, Meany ain't going to pay any attention to it, ain't going to remember. You go ahead where you've used him before in your local unions, use him like you've been doing, forget about it. And that's what we did.
What did
That's what I call union politics.
No kidding. What did you feel after being associated with United Textile Workers for 20-odd years and having this thrown at you by the...
What did I feel? Well, it did not disillusion me with the trade union movement. That's number one. And the reason I say that is because I felt that it was one man.
Mr. Meany.
That's right. And because of his dominance of the international unions, that he was able to do it. And I didn't condemn the trade union movement for it. As a matter of fact, in the period of time that followed, I reestablished what I call reestablished my law practice. I used to look back on it and say, well, you know, maybe he did me a favor. And the reason I say that is because up until that time, I was spending 90% of my time on the road. I was working 20 hours a day. I was virtually killing myself, not knowing that I was doing it, by being on the road, administering contracts, negotiating contracts, handle legal matters, and I had an understanding with them that I would continue to represent the garment workers and the Hatters
Right,
Union.
as well as the...
That's right. And there were certain things that happened that gave me a certain amount of, well, I guess you'd call good feeling. The fact, like Rose doing what he did. Dubinsky was not on that committee. He said, it wasn't right. That's not going to change our relationship. He says, as far as I'm concerned, Meany does not run our union. I don't believe a word of what they tried to do. Not only that, but he said, but I think at one time he said, you know, that was a smart idea to set up their own business on automobiles. And then he started telling me how much they were paying to Avis and all these other people, and they still rent like that. Any number of other unions that I worked with, same thing. So when you ask, it was not a matter of everybody being down on you and feeling that you'd done something wrong. As a matter of fact, one of the union presidents, who they later on went after, and whom I shall not name, saw me, says, Joe, one thing about it, and by the way, he was cleared. He says, one thing about it, I like loyalty. Because the word was out that they were trying to get me, and that there was an effort being made for me to put these two leaders in the hole. And he says, you can't buy it. It was things like that, when you ask what effect did it have on you. While it bothered me, and it had a tremendous effect in terms of dollars, it still was what you call.
And you're saying 3 years later, you then regained the position as counsel, or?
No, what I did was I continued to handle matters for their local unions in this end of the world and their arbitrations for years and years and years afterwards. They got another general counsel, a man up in Johnson City, Tennessee, who had never handled a labor matter before. Schaffenbill became the president. Schaffenbill was a man that came out of Kenosha, Wisconsin, headed the textile union local there, became a district president. I nominated him I say I nominated, I suggested him as a vice president, got him nominated with the executive board, that sort of thing. He became an executive board member. They got a secretary treasurer. The secretary treasurer was a man named Salem, who took Clinton's place. Salem was the leader of the opposition to the International Union in New England when they tried to split away into the Woolen Division. I met him on a street corner with another man and talked to him, and he wanted to pull with them. I persuaded him that he had no future going with them, but he would have a future and a contribution to the trade union movement if he stayed with us. He stayed with us. I helped him become a vice president because I figured he was a good man. He became the International Secretary Treasurer. He is now dead. Schaffenbill is now dead. You see, reaching the age that I have reached, I have outlived many of these people, and I look back and I get a certain amount of satisfaction. Just like I found a man who was a sweeper in Rockmart, in a textile mill there, the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. I got him to be a part-time organizer. I got him to be a full-time organizer. We had pushed him to being a vice president. He was under my direction. That's what used to confuse people, because I was the director and he is a vice president under my direction. He was a vice president. He later on became one of the lower southeast director. He retired. He died within recent time. He used to come by and visit with me. His wife was, I suspect that his wife, if she went to the 3rd grade, was about as far as she went. You look back, you get a lot of satisfaction. These are people you help make a life for themselves. But there are also the events like this. There are other events that we have not even begun to go into.
Sure. Just for clarification,
Yeah.
what had happened back here in Atlanta concerning the auto thing? You know,
Oh, you mean the rental thing?
yeah.
When all this was used like that, and before there was any decision made or anything else, I said, hell, let's get rid of the damn thing. Because if that's what they're going to use on us, so go rent from Avis or go rent from what's your name. That's what we did.
I mean, back in Atlanta, had there been any repercussions or?
Or in terms of the trade union movement?
No, in terms of you, in terms of,
Oh, I got some publicity here, but I don't remember that it meant a great deal. And the reason that I say that I don't remember that it meant a great deal was because the approach of the trade union movement here to that committee was that they're a bunch of bastards. The approach to the what did they call that committee? Was not an ethical committee. They called it something else. I used to say that
ethics committee?
this is the only organization that I know that agrees to commit hara-kiri. And that's what they were doing. They were killing off some of their own top leadership, good, bad, or indifferent. The bakery workers were involved with them too, if you remember. They had we used to call them heresy trials.
Right.
And I told when I was talking to the executive board that time and told them what had happened, I said it's another thing like the heresy trial that I had in Atlanta when they accused me of teaching communism down here. You know, life's got these things, but that was a real traumatic experience in more ways than one. I had been before congressional committees before that time, but never where I was having a finger put on me, and never where I had the experience that I had with this Bobby Kennedy thing. And that's why I've said to everybody since that time, as far as I'm concerned, he's a no good SOB. And as far as him having any moral standing in my mind. He has none, because what he was telling me is lie on these people, or be in effect a pimp on these people, on something that you know is not true. Now, what he was doing also was telling me, if you don't do it, we got you. So what he was doing was he was putting the pressure on me, but he doesn't know that as far as I'm concerned, I ain't scared to go to jail. I ain't scared of those sort of things. You either believe or you don't believe. That's the story.
That's the story.
That was quite an effort. And by the way, should we finish up? Tony Valenti, after he resigned, for a while sold real estate. He was blacklisted in the trade union movement. He had come up out of the plant, gone all the way to the top, worked real hard, not the brightest guy in the world. Clennet was the same thing, but Clennet was a much smarter man. He then ran into a man named Arbaugh, A-R-B-A-U-G-H, who ran a rib place in Washington, D.C. with, like the Varsity has dogs and so on. He worked for him for a period of time. Arbaugh then got sick, eventually died, but before he did, he turned the place over to his wife, and his wife couldn't run it. Then Tony was running it for him. Then she sold it to him. When she sold it to him, the business then was not as good as it had been under Arbaugh, because he was one of these guys, you know, like 54 in New York, where they have a big connection with big names and all this other thing. And his wife didn't do it. Tony didn't have it either, really. Anyway, the lease ran out on his place, so it was a matter of getting another place. I get a call one bright day from Tony. I hadn't heard from him God knows when. Joe, yeah, how you doing? Go through the pleasantries. You want to go into restaurant business? I said, I want to do what? Want to go into restaurant business? I said, Tony, what's on your mind? You know. Then he tells me he's got a chance to buy it,
The rib place.
the rib place, but he's got to move, but he hadn't got the money. He's talked to a couple of his friends up there, and he's gotten $5,000 apiece from them. I said, Tony, you know I haven't got any money like that. Well, he said, I thought that maybe you'd borrow the money and I'd give you an interest in it. I said, Tony, I ain't got it. I'd like to help you. I think a week, 2 weeks goes by, 3 weeks, who knows. Calls me up, says, Joe, I've got everything but $5,000. How about it? Help me. I said, Tony, if I borrow it from the bank, I can give it to you. But I said, I can't afford to have to pay the damn thing back. Make the long story short, I borrowed it from the bank. I gave it to him. He paid for a while. The business went to hell. It was the wrong location. I wound up paying the damn loan. Lloyd Clennet changed his name to Roberts, last name, moved to Florida. He couldn't find anything to do in Washington. His name was anathema in the trade union movement. Lloyd was a real pusher. That's why he got where he did. He was energetic. He was younger than Tony and so on. Anyway, he wound up being a salesman in Miami. He then got involved in furniture selling, not retail but wholesale, then found that there was a market for mattress manufacturing. Wound up. Oh yeah, by the way, they got him on income taxes on something with all this going on, because they claimed that this was money that he had made use of and they hadn't returned, and it was supposed to be expense money, whatever it was. They were after him. He spent some time in Eglin before he did, and then he changed his name. His wife and children changed their names too. He got into the mattress business, did a hell of a good job, made a lot of money, more money than he'd ever made in the trade union movement, and then suddenly died down there. I heard his wife call me up one day. I've lost track of him. His wife called me up one day and told me that he was real badly sick. Pancreas, something like that, gone bad, and there was no hope and so on. And I kept in touch with her for a while. Tony's wife, Mary Valenti, was the secretary. What was the man's name in Pennsylvania who was on the Un-American Committee for years and years and years and years?
That's Specter.
No. This goes back. If I heard his name, I would remember. He was a Republican, but there were some good features about him. That he's not like Weicker, but you know, he didn't follow the whole line. She was his secretary for many. Who? No. For many years. Finally, when he either died or stepped down, she quit and had a pension. Tony had a daughter. The daughter has finished college. They still live in the same house. It created all that so-called problem that he was supposed to have been involved in. I hear from Mary a couple times a year, maybe. I call her up sometimes when I go to Washington. It really broke her heart. The reason I say that is, I remember after all this happened, Tony could have been, if he wanted to, a professional card shark. He had the kind of a mind that could remember every damn card. I remember we went to an AFL convention in Las Vegas. I had never been there before. I go there with Tony and with Lloyd. No, it was in, what's the town on the coast? Los Angeles, it's close to it, to Las Vegas. Is LA close to Las Vegas or San Francisco? We fly over there. The convention starts, and then there's a weekend break, and all the delegates go over to Las Vegas. We go over there. I don't have any gambling sense at all. I don't even play the slot machine because it has no thrill for me. But I know that Tony is a good card player, because when the executive board used to get through with their executive board meetings, I used to call up my brother who lived in Washington, or somebody in the town, go see him, go to play, go to museum, whatever the hell it was. They sit and play cards. I never played with them. We go over there and he's going to play. So I said, well, you know, I don't gamble, Tony. Here's $50. You put it on, or whatever you do, put on half of what you do. And if I win anything, I win it. And if I don't, I don't. I won money. Any kind of thing like that. He had an uncanny ability to remember cards. That he could do. And we got to talking about it afterwards, Mary and I did. She said, you know, what they accused him of and what he lost his entire life on, he could have won in one night playing cards with no problem, because she also knew that he had this uncanny ability. And when I say uncanny ability, I think it's something beyond that. You know, you remember cards, but after a while he can tell when he plays with you why you're doing what you're doing. you know, what you're bidding for, whatever it is. What they play, Pinochle Poker 21, is it 21? That sort of thing. And he, amazing. Just like there was another man on that executive board by the name of Bert Hyman. Now, Bert Hyman was an old, rough, tough textile worker, came out of Jamestown, New York. Bert loved to play. Whenever anybody was ready to play, he was ready to play. I guess I was with this man off and on different occasions over a period of, 10 years, 15 years, whatever. I have seen him where he was winning more money than you would believe. Never quit. Only quit when he was losing. I have never seen him walk away from the table winning. You tell me why. Some people are that way. But that's the remainder of the story on Tony and Lloyd and that episode.
Is this Tony Valente any relationship to the Tony Valente of the oil and chemical workers?
No, none whatsoever. Tony Valente's people came out of New England, and that's exactly where his beginning was. He was, as I say, he started in the plant, worked himself up through the union, straight up, and was a real, I call him a plotter. Bang, 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 but he worked at it and did all right. Clennet in a flash.